Everybody, welcome back to Video Episode. Today we're continuing the series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, and today we're going to be talking about the most recent MiSTer FPGA core on the Nintendo 64 side as far as analog video out is concerned. Because recently I did a video on the new 480p mode for the 480i interlace games, and while talking about the frame buffer and how that would look on an analog television, I decided this was as good a time as any to talk about analog on Nintendo 64 because you guys have been asking about it. Before we get too far involved, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, you got a Patreon link down below as well. But of all the consoles of this generation, Sega Saturn, PlayStation 1, and Nintendo 64, Nintendo 64 definitely is the one that looks the best when it's on an analog source and not a digital source, as long as we're talking about real original hardware. Getting RGB out of the MiSTer into the back of an analog television is incredible for this core. This is the 480p core right here, and you're going to see that there's no interlacing because it's actually grabbing the full 480p frame buffer before the Nintendo 64 passes it on because it cannot output 480i. You'll see here is 480i when it's captured digitally, you're going to see a lot of those interlacing lines introduced. If we take a look at that 480i content on an analog CRT television, a PVM in this case, it looks absolutely spectacular. That is because interlaced video mode was a trick of how CRTs worked, drawing fields not frames, and with the refresh rate you're actually able to do this with basically no noticeable difference to the human eye. But you need that CRT technology, you need those phosphors and the raster pattern to be able to pull that convincing of a look off. And sorry about the little bit of moire on the screen, not much I can do about that with my camera sensor. As we go back to the direct capture of 480p on Castlevania Legacy of Darkness, this does look incredible, but it does sharpen it up a bit more. If we move back over to interlace, that Nintendo 64 smoothing comes back, but we get the interlacing lines again. Playing on an analog television is the best of both worlds. When we get that nice, smooth, Vaseline image from the Nintendo 64, and we don't have to see the interlacing lines whatsoever, because this was always intended to be presented on a CRT television, not on an LCD TV, because they basically did not exist back when this game and this hardware was on the market. And as we go around this little water area here that I showed you before, that water just blends so well on an analog television. This is what it looks like on the MiSTer itself, and while it does have a very good look to it, and this is in 480p mode, it doesn't look as good as the CRT television. Some of the visual effects that the Nintendo 64 pulled off were intended to be using the CRT technology to hide some of them and blend them together. This dragon here in Legacy of Darkness is just so good on CRT. Or something like Super Mario 64, obviously the first time pretty much all of us played this was on a CRT television, either in our family's living rooms or if you were lucky, a television in your bedroom. And this is another game with all of those primary colors, all of that bright cheer on the screen. It has a certain glow and a certain look on a CRT television that I just think helps the game even further. But the most fun part is Robert has given us all of these different VI implementations we can turn on and off, and we can also turn off the texture filtering. So you can make Super Mario 64 look like a PlayStation 1 game, which if I capture in HDMI can be a little bit too pixely and a little bit too garish. Here on a CRT television you can still see those pixels, but they do blend together much better than on an HDMI signal, so it kind of makes this like a Nintendo 32, not 64. Pun intended, just reducing it down to the quote-unquote bitrate of the PlayStation 1, but honestly Nintendo 64 does very little at 64 bits. It is just the name of the console. But the fact that we can do all this, change the image so much on the CRT, and just go again right into the adventure, it's just so much fun. And this is why CRT televisions are so good for Nintendo 64. Taking a look at Battle for Naboo here, and of course because we are on the analog video mode, the clean HDMI mode isn't even going to be selectable. This does look great. Sure, it doesn't run very fast, but that has nothing to do with the type of television you're on. It just chugs on the frame rate. But you're going to see no interlacing here. You're just going to get a higher resolution looking image because we're in 480i mode. Where if we move over to direct capture on MiSTer in the interlace mode, you're going to see all of those interlacing lines, especially in the archways there and in the distance as you turn the camera. It just isn't the prettiest look when you're on HDMI. It has nothing to do with the core. This is just how the underlying video technologies work. It is how it is. But as we move back over to the CRT television, all of the smoothing here, having the interlaced video mode be presented on a 240p television using a 480i signal, it just makes everything look that much better. And that's what I've been finding when I've been taking a look at Nintendo 64 over RGB. It's the best of both worlds. You get the screen technology that makes Nintendo 64 better, and you also get all of the enhancements and innovations Robert or FPGAZumSpass have brought to the core at the same time, because even these scan lines here, it just looks so good, and Robert requested a little bit of Kirby footage. We'll have some in a moment. But this is what a CRT television looks like in the different stages of close-up, and big thanks to Dorfus for these shots. You can see the phosphors in real time dancing and moving around. There's so many ways to emulate this look, but honestly, the CRT television just does it, and that's the fun of this. You see here, you can see all of those lines, you can see all of the motion. It just looks so pretty when you're viewing it on a CRT TV. And something like Kirby 64 with all the fun colors just looks incredible. Now the thing about shooting CRT televisions is you're never going to get 100% of the presentation over communicated via YouTube or a camera. This is, you need to be in the same room to see this sort of thing, because these Sony PVMs I use have an absolutely rock solid, beautiful looking image that no camera is ever going to capture and justify. And that's the great thing about the core, is it gives us so many diverse options. If you have a CRT television around, you can just start playing it there. You can play it on HDMI on your LCD television. You can turn on clean HDMI mode and get a 480p frame buffer out of 480i games. You can do whatever you want. A CRT in your arsenal is just one more fun way to enjoy the Nintendo 64. But as far as the video implementation here, it just looks every bit as good as I had hoped. And yes, that's me in the reflection of the television right there. I'm trying to sit on the floor to hide myself because I do have to do this off camera. But even something like this Star Wars game here, it's not the worst when you see the interlacing, but the smoothness is just so good on a CRT television. Whether you're on composite, whether you're on component, S-video, or RGB in this instance, even composite looks great and smooths out a lot of the rough edges of Nintendo 64, because even with all of the VI implementations, even with clean HDMI, seeing Nintendo 64 run at such a high resolution was not how it was intended. It looks incredible, and the work that Robert's done has made it look better than I've ever seen it before, but honestly, I think of all the consoles of this generation, the Nintendo 64 lends itself the most to being on CRT, because as we move over here, you're going to start seeing those interlacing lines as we fly around that we didn't just see when we were on the CRT television. Because of the Vaseline-ness of Nintendo 64, the dithering, all of the different VI implementations, it just looks better on a CRT. And now we've turned on that 480p mode here, which does look in fact good as well. It's basically as rock solid stable as you would get on 480i on a CRT television. But again, you'll see as we move over here, there's something about how the draw-in looks on a 240p signal or a 480i signal that just smooths it out on the analog source. That's a lot of what these televisions do. It's not just that a PVM looks great, it's that the underlying technology of how the television draws an image actually kind of takes the rough edges away from the image and really just makes them look that much better. Because a lot of the artists, a lot of the designers back in the day were taking advantage and keeping in mind the CRT when they were developing art and different techniques. You could hide some sins on a 240p television that you cannot hide at 1080p or higher. The artists, the designers are always working with the technology of the day in mind. They would never consider trying to do something for a technology that wouldn't exist for 10 to 15 years. But Mario on a CRT, a PVM with RGB on MiSTer FPGA, it's just the best of both worlds. Because a regular Nintendo 64 can't even do RGB, this is the best signal you're ever going to get out of a Nintendo 64 without modifying it, and the best signal you can get is going to be coming out of MiSTer FPGA. And how much fun is that? It's only been 9 months since development started, and we can say all these things about the Nintendo 64 core. But you guys kept asking for me to take a look at analog video signals out of MiSTer FPGA for Nintendo 64, and that is this video. If you have a PVM, if you have a CRT, go ahead and start playing Nintendo 64 there. Not only is it the nostalgic favorite, but it just helps a lot of the games look that much better being on the screen type that they were developed for. Sure that if you have any questions or comments, leave them down below, but we're done. I'm going to go play some more Kirby 64 on my PVM. Bye-bye.